time, what do we reckon? We've gone a couple of minutes past half past. We've probably got most people here that are going to join live. So I will crack on. I'll do the intro today because the Isle of Man are hosting today. So fast am I, or good afternoon in English. Welcome to the 9th in our series of Try Biosphere webinars that we've been hosting in collaboration with Kerry and Dublin Bay Biosphere Reserves to mark and celebrate 50 years of UNESCO's Man and the Biosphere programme. Gurmai Muru, Dachuli Payach son Chit Jew, Mish Breesha as Tami Gobracha son Chemic Seal Biosphere Vannin. A big thank you to everyone for joining today. I'm Breesha and I work for UNESCO Biosphere Isle of Man. So before I introduce our topic and our speaker today, let's pop over to Eleanor and Kerry and Dean in Dublin to hear a little bit about their respective reserves. Thank you, Eleanor or Dean.
Will I jump in first, Dean?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, thanks, Breesha. I'm delighted to join us again, all of the team here again on the Try Biosphere webinar programme. Jumping in from Kerry down in the southwest of Ireland. So we're actually a mountain biosphere. So as you can see behind me, we've got some beautiful mountainscapes and lakes. And I'm really interested in Breesha's talk today. I'm trying to pronounce the name right now. I know I'm getting it totally wrong. We have a strong focus here on art and culture within the biosphere area in the context of using art as a mechanism for engaging people in nature conservation as well. So I'm really excited about today's talk and I'm delighted to be joining you. And it's been such a pleasure over the year working with the Isle of Man and with Dublin Bay on this collaborative programme of events that's celebrating the 50th year of the Man and the Biosphere programme. So thanks a million for having us again.
Thanks, Eleanor. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned about the collaboration. I mean, that's, really important. We've had this opportunity to share ideas, learn from each other, learn from each other really, really importantly. I mean, we've got a Biosphere Award for young people that was borrowed from the Isle of Man Biosphere. And there's lots of events that take place like that where we share ideas and we produce these fantastic programs as a result, by learning from each other. And I think that's a little bit about what this webinar is today, to learn a little bit about our culture and our history and, take that going forward. So that's the biggest take from this. It's the collaboration to understand and learn from each other and, do better from that. So, and that's what Biospheres are all about, learning and moving forward. So thank you very much, Breesha. And I'm really, really looking forward to this webinar for sure.
Guramayu, Dean, as Eleanor. So today's topic's particularly special to me, and there's a nice little link in that it's actually my 1-year anniversary today working for you, Biosphere Isle of Man, which is mad. It's flown by, but I feel like I've done so much as well. And yeah, just a big thank you, really. It's been amazing, and I've been working with some amazingly passionate and hardworking individuals and organisations, and yeah, really, really nice job to have. So normally when we do these webinars, we'll be talking about something that you can see, whether it's a member of the natural world, whether it's a geographical location, or it's a learned skill. Culture and sense of place are a lot harder to see and to measure. Culture could easily be overlooked when considering the characteristics of a biosphere, when in fact it's one of the most central pillars to make a place of what it is. Something that I've cherished personally my whole life is this intense feeling of belonging to this island. A lot of people will know exactly what I'm talking about when I describe this invisible pull, or the Manx magnet as I sometimes refer to it. And it kind of roots you here, and it can help a lot with kind of feelings of loneliness and despair. If you ever feel like you don't have anyone or anything, it's very important to go back to that feeling of belonging. And our Manx language, Manx Gaelic, which I was lucky enough to learn alongside English growing up, it's kind of another thread of that pulling rope, another connection with the land and its historic tales, and adding to that feeling of I belong here. And that true sense of place and belonging is something that's overwhelmingly special, and when it is found, it must be cherished. So today we are delighted to be joined by a fellow Breesha, Dr Breesha Maddrell. She's delivering a talk that highlights the importance of culture and storytelling on our biosphere, accompanied by short videos. Breesha is the director of Culture Vannin, an organisation that supports and promotes Manx culture, which is hugely important. She has an interdisciplinary background in traditional and classical music, language and sociolinguistics, and arts development. She's an active musician, singer and composer, and her role in Culture Vannin involves the development of strategies and policies for the advancement of Manx culture and heritage. And Culture Vannin also sit on our stakeholder partnership group for Biosphere and are valued partners of UNESCO Biosphere Isle of Man. So we will be leaving a little bit of time at the end for questions. If anyone's got any questions throughout the webinar, please pop them in the Q&A section. And thank you, Breesha, Guramayad, and over to you.
Guramayad Breesha, and fastamai to everyone on what started as quite a wet and windy day in the Isle of Man, but it's clearing up quite nicely. Now, if I can work the technology, which I'm hoping I can, I'm going to start with a wonderful lockdown film about St. Patrick and the Devil, just in case you hadn't heard one of the stories about how the Isle of Man was formed. So let's find this one, St. Patrick and the Jowl.
St. Patrick and the Jowl, St. Patrick and the Jowl, St. Patrick and the Jowl, St. Patrick and the Jowl. St. Patrick and the Jowl. Once upon a time, the Jowl was dragging about Ireland when he saw a bit of land which was especially wonderful. So he grabbed it for himself and set off across the sea. La, la. But just then St. Patrick came along and saw the old boy with a piece of land. He did not like that. Oh no, on my own shore. And so Patrick got a bit of holy water, and threw it all over the Jowl. The Jowl dropped the bit of land and it fell into the sea, forming the Isle of Man. Yay! It is because of this that the Jowl has never been able to learn Manx. Gilgaboo! St. Patrick and the Jowl, St. Patrick and the Jowl, St. Patrick and the Jowl, St. Patrick and the Jowl.
There we go. I love the devil's wobbly eyes in that. I don't know if you noticed that detail. Whether it was the devil or a giant that dropped or threw a piece of Ireland into the middle of the Irish Sea, or whether rising sea levels caused by melting glaciers cut us off from surrounding land masses, we're lucky to find ourselves in the only entire jurisdiction in the world to be awarded the prestigious title of a UNESCO Biosphere. I come from a small island that looks out onto an even smaller island. I live in a place where I can walk along its spine and see its edges to my left and right. Living here makes you acutely aware of these things called edges, never fixed, but shifting with the tide, with the weather, with the mood of the island. And these boundaries are made and remade each day. All of the biospheres represented by this webinar series know the joy of standing at the water's edge, whether that's sea or lake, and how wonderful a place this is if you're interested in the changing nature of life. What stands still stagnates after all. For centuries, writers and artists have called this place that is made and remade the space between, the liminal, somewhere full of imagination, of possibility, and somewhere spilling over with stories. Its constantly changing nature reminds us that creativity and innovation are inherent to our environment and to our lives. It also forces us to consider the ways in which stories shape us and we them in their retelling. For stories are never fixed, never finished. They too are being made and remade, especially our biosphere stories. Here in the Isle of Man, we call our legendary first ruler Manannan Mac Lir, but you may know him in Ireland as Manannan, a sea god, an enchanter, and most helpfully for us, a shapeshifter. Manannan connects the hills and the coast as he broods in his castle at the top of South Barrule and rolls down the hillside, on occasion as flaming three legs to frighten people off, to the sea where he travels beneath the waves, where he becomes one with the surf. He wraps his cloak of mist around us to protect us from invaders, and today that will include any unwelcome visitors. and he helps bind the human experience with the natural world. Manannan also connects all of our islands. He's known by many names and in many guises over many centuries. And so every time we tell stories of Manannan, we are reminding those around us that our land and seascapes are interconnected, that they're all important, and that they are places and spaces that bind us. And telling stories, as we all know, I think, is important, as it is at the heart of what it is to be human. We tell stories so that others might remember them, and we tell stories so that we won't forget. Manannan was named as the patron of Manx culture by early 20th century cultural revivalists such as Mona Douglas, who took her own inspiration from the Irish writer and theosophist A.E. George Russell. When St. Patrick banished him and drove the old ways out, Manannan retreated to an island beneath the sea, just off the Calf of Man, waiting until the Isle of Man is in the right state for him to return. In Manx, it's known as Elian Shiant, the secret or blessed isle. And I wonder if this story has something quiet to say about changing sea levels too. Perhaps the mighty shapeshifter has secretly transformed himself into an ambassador for our biosphere. Manannan is certainly 21st century ready with their non-binary fluidity, and they really wouldn't ask for much in return.
I'm at the bottom of South Barrule today because it is the middle of summer, and traditionally the Manx people would cut reeds at the bottom of Barrule and take them up the hill and leave them at the top as their rent for Manannan Maclia. He's written down in various places as being a god or as being more like a king or a chief of Man, and he was believed to be the ruler of Man, and some people believe that's where we get the name the Isle of Man, the Isle of Manannan. And he lived here on Barrule in a fort. He was believed never to have to resort to force to protect his island, so he was able to shroud the island in a magical mist, which is known as Manannan's cloak, so that any potential invaders wouldn't see it or pass it by. And if anyone did manage to slip through his mist, it was believed that he could make one man standing on the brow of a hill look as though he were 100, so he could deter invaders like that. Manannan ruled with kindness, and so the people of the island paid a rent to him each year. They had a pretty good deal really, because all they had to do was bring green rushes to the top of Barrule on Midsummer's Eve, which is St John's Eve, so in Fail Yon, the festival of John, and they would cut the reeds at the bottom of Barrule and take them up and give them to Manannan as their year's rent for living on his island. This tradition is still carried out today in the Isle of Man, not by everybody as it once purportedly was, but the most common place that people might have seen it is actually between the church and the hill on Tynwald Day. Rushes are laid along the gravel path, and you'll notice that if you look carefully on Tynwald Day. And also there are still people who will take rushes to the top of Barrule and lay them there. It's important to me and to my family, less from a traditional point of view, although I think it's important to keep these traditions alive. We're a farming family, and it's important to us that we recognise the seasons and that we are truly dependent on them. And so it's nice just to add this old tradition into something that we still value and need today.
I hope you enjoyed that. We could have chosen someone who was an expert on folklore or mythology to narrate this, but we didn't. The film features and is narrated by Sarah Quayle, who's a Manx speaker and someone who comes from a farming background. Her words at the end tell you about how this story speaks to her, of the need to recognise the changing seasons. By placing people immersed in their landscapes within these old stories, we can find a newness in their retelling. The short film speaks to so many different audiences through its layers of meanings. The universality and timelessness of legend and myth, a celebration of our national day, a connection with the work of the farming community, and just the importance of spending time outside within our landscapes with family or friends. And underpinning it all, the song that is sung is a modern setting by Annie Kissack of the oldest text in Manx Gaelic, the Manannan or traditionary ballad. And Annie was someone who was taught by Mona Douglas in Eglach Vannin youth movement. So Mona's stories are still being shaped. I'm going to spend much of this talk exploring the importance of stories and sense of place within our biospheres with the help of short films that we've made with the community here in the Isle of Man. These come from the work of our wonderful development officers, past and present, Guramayu Ulyu, and in particular, James Franklin and the talented filmmakers he works with. Sometimes we've chosen the right way to tell them, and other times we could have done better. We'll reflect on what worked best and where we slightly missed the mark. As Breesha mentioned, I work for an organisation called Culture Vannin. We're a government-funded agency that is tasked with supporting and promoting and developing Manx culture and cultural heritage. We focus on making Manx culture accessible and relevant to people today. Because of the size of the island and what they call economy of scale, we have to cover aspects of culture that would be assigned to different organisations in Ireland. We support and promote Manx language, music, dance, folklore, history, archaeology, architecture, even ecology and industrial development. It's a very wide remit and one that can only be fulfilled through a combination of development work and grant giving, partnering with the community. We've been doing this for about 40 years now, under our newer name, as well as under the name which founded us, the Manx Heritage Foundation, Undernus Irecht Vannin. Now, we all know that stories don't always agree with each other, and that the more that we listen to in relation to each other, the greater an insight we have into a sense of place, a sense of culture. I'm particularly interested, I suppose, in how the way we tell stories has changed in recent years, not only in response to the effects of the global pandemic, but also in the face of the rapid shift in technology and the changing patterns of inheritance within our landscapes. And storytelling is on every platform, from YouTube to Instagram. And in lots of ways, it's becoming more interactive, and TikTok is a great example. Most of what I will share today are visual stories in the form of short films and can be found on YouTube and Vimeo, as well as shared across our other social media platforms. I wish that I were as skillful a storyteller as my paternal grandmother, Doris Catherine McGain, who could keep you for hours at the kitchen table as she nestled stories inside each other, never concluding the first until many others had been told. She had stories of ghostly black sails on the horizon remembered on the deathbeds of old men, brass rings blown off a wrecked ship, only to swing from their fixings on the hearth at midnight on the anniversary of the disaster. She had tales too of the shift from Manx to English, another space between. As a young girl, she grew up in the village of one of the last native speakers of Manx, Harry Kelly, and she would recall that she went for afternoon tea with her mother at the invitation of Norwegian linguist Carl Marstrander, who had arrived to notate what Kelly said and how. Where is your tongue when you say this word, and where is it when you say that? In my head was a frustrated response. Anyway, Marstrander told her that she had the high cheekbones of a Scandinavian, and she delighted in this. And later she would meet Eamon de Valera and see the arrival of the Irish Folklore Commission, who did so much to record really precious stories which have sustained the Manx language ever since. My grandmother also had stories full of fun, of a father sailing his schooner in and out of the harbours around the island and getting up to great tricks with his friends. For all that she had to live through tougher times, she grew up in a household full of music and laughter, and she made sure she had the best stories to tell and took great joy in their telling, as she did in most things in life. I think by recalling these, I just wanted to reflect on the fact that storytelling never falls out of fashion. No matter how impatient our lives become, how short our attention spans appear to be, stories are important because they shape our conversations and our worlds. Those involved in marketing spend a lot of their time building a story so that we have something to relate to, something to connect us to their product. And stories work because they appeal to all kinds of learners, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, because they allow us to paint mental pictures, absorb words and texts, and also to learn from the feelings, from the emotional connections. And so when we're persuading people of the idea and importance of something as wonderful as a biosphere, it's the stories that will speak to the heart space. In his inaugural Biosphere Isle of Man lecture, world-renowned conservationist and biodiversity expert, Professor Peter Bridgewater, talked of culture as the forgotten fourth leg of biosphere reserves. He said that we should be thinking of people as part of biodiversity, that it's never a question of us and biodiversity as something separate. And knowing this should lie at the core of what a biosphere is. Now, we are fortunate here in the Isle of Man, as you are in Dublin and Kerry, that our biosphere officers are very knowledgeable and they're very aware of the importance of cultural landscapes, and that arts, culture and heritage not only are part of the definition of what a biosphere is, but that they help us to tell the other stories of the biosphere too. But I would argue that this differs from a more general perception. We've just had a general election here in the Isle of Man, and I've spent the past few weeks reading lots of manifestos. And pleasingly enough, Biosphere Isle of Man was frequently mentioned, but always in a way that solely focused on natural land and seascapes, on biodiversity as something separate to people. So how do we overcome this? In order to remember, we must use the very thing that is forgotten. Intangible culture is such an instinctive and inherent part of our lives, we can forget to shout about it. Culture is what we do as people. It's the sum of our behaviours, what we wear, what we eat, how we express ourselves through language and creativity, how we express our relationships with each other and with the world around us. Marine scientists will tell us that the future is as much blue as it is green, but how do I accept that deep within? Why should I care? How do I care? We need stories that speak to the heart space, stories that we can carry with us, that we can easily share. Sometimes it may seem like things might be neater for the planet if most of the human influence were removed, but that is a story that would, of course, remain untold because there would be no one to tell it. Well, that's enough, I think, of the whys and wherefores. It's time we caught up with a master storyteller, John Cannell, talking here to Katie Newton, not about press gangs and murders, you can find them online after this if you want to, but simply about field names on his farm, Ballycannairn. In Manx, a cannairn is a heap or a mound, and there's, I think, a Ballycannairn in Waterford. There will be cannairns everywhere. So here we go.
The farm is we've got the same field names on the fields. The names are the same as they were all those hundreds of years ago, and we use them today. And when I left school, I said to my father, wouldn't it be better to call them number 1, 2 and 3? And he said, no, he said, I wouldn't know what you were talking about. And now I'm exactly the same. My daughter, who has taken over the farm from me, has now got her head round the names, and she can manage to get them pretty well spot on. The field we're in now is the Woolly Woor, and that's the cows' field. Mm-hmm. And it was always a handy field for the cows for the yard. I can remember all sorts of things happening in here, like the time my father said he could remember a man sowing seeds with the fiddle up here. And his mother coming up with a big jug of custard to the man. He drunk the whole jug of custard in the gateway over there. This field is called the Molla Close, and that one the next door is in Laddie-Crink. Yeah, and the big long one you see down by the shore, that was 3 fields, Taltray, Lengesh and Cronaree. Now, I believe one of them means red sand, which is fair enough. There is a sandy piece in the middle. I don't really know what the others. There's a Glengesh would be near there's a Glenthur there. That inlet there is Glenthur. It could be near that. I don't know. You got the one behind the yard. There's the Nye, and then you got the Woolly Woors, 2 Woolly Woors, and then you've got the Bullabrain, the Lag, Cronamana. Across the road you've got the Bullygarbel, which is the horses' field. The next is Dulciamark, which is the Hare's Gap. The next is Mulyalegich, no, Mulyalegich, there's two Mulyalegichs, and that I believe means in a day. And in those days, there was a house out there at one time a day. In those days, the days before the local government board and the rest of them, if you could build a house in a field in a day and be living in it for night, nobody could stop you building a house in their field.
Really?
Yep. Yep. I don't think that would hold water today, though.
I think there's quite a lot tightly packed into that 2-minute piece. We hear how he learned these names, how as a young man he considered them inconsequential, how he came to understand them and their reasoning, the point of the telling, and finally how his daughter has most of them right now. She can pass them down to whoever inherits the land from her. And we hear lots of words that might be familiar to you and to other farms. The nigh, a flat field or paddock. We have a couple of woolly woor, cattle folds, woolly gavel, fields suitable for horses. We even have a dulce mark, a hare's gap, probably from the Manx Dorlish mwech. We find out names that have lost much of their meaning to him, but which are tripped together. Toltrai, Glengesh, Tronnery. We hear the sounds for the shore, try, glimpses of sea foam perhaps, kesh, and he talks of red sand. Perhaps Ree is where the Manx word rai, for red, has come to rest. Sometimes names become rhythms and patterns that mark the space between languages, between naming and retelling. By watching this, we are reminded that all history collection can, but doesn't often, happen outside. By talking to people in the environment that's right for them, you have an opportunity to tap into what is held as intimate knowledge, and it's intimate knowledge that can be told and shared with you in a really relaxed way. We find a deep sense of care and understanding, guardianship rather than ownership, passed from one generation to the next. And this is a key concept for all of our biospheres. We are all guardians. And the film lets him pass their names and importance on to you, even if you may never become the guardian of those fields, of that farm. Those that work the land after him will need to know that this field is sandy and that one is better for their cattle and the other place to put the horses. But for those of us who will never take on that, he's sharing something personal and precious in this telling, something which even a few decades ago we might not have been privileged to hear. And perhaps deep within himself, there is an understanding that these stories are important to share. For the more people who care about these names, about the earth and the stones where their roots twist, the more chance they have of not being forgotten. Another of the extracts from the longer interview with John Cannell, and it's really worth listening to that and watching that if you want to, refers to a tree at a nearby farm used for breaking in horses. This emphasises how important asking the right questions is, how local knowledge can be. He's talking about the Burke farm, which is on the same stretch of coast, not far away. But I don't know very much about that, like I do around here. Talk to people about what they know in a place that they know. Listen carefully to what they say. Listen to what seems specific and how it can speak to a wider context. Earlier on, I promised that I would also tell you about how easy it is to miss the mark slightly. We sometimes record just in Manx, and this one's short, so don't panic. Here we have Davy Quillen and his good friend Derek Phillips in a boat off Port Erin in the southwest of the island, talking about some of the names and landmarks about the coast. When I was learning Manx, I would sit at an e-gilgach in a pub and just listen to these two voices and not want to interrupt their stories.
Shen Kiona Kerry and as the great na Castle and Rish na Cregan on Shen.
Oh, the jar.
They stacked and so as kin Shen to Shen Kiona Kerry. Because kind of a Giona Murrid as Craig Lewa. That's red time na Dr Breesha on Shen.
Aye, te fodam fagan.
The Shen and Craig Lewa.
She.
That's Shen Edmund feel by and Mona. How can I be sugar dear Mona Edmund McGirt and so?
Wel, coniwch yn yw tri haising yn mac o cws y ffrint yn nes os Linda.
Linda, ha.
As haising oliw mogiet am clystus mogiet am colwnius. As fel cor oliw na yn y giorn, as yn y carn, o fe.
Haraw mi eisiau rwgad o'r stragad o'n sbwrtian, as me, but tulio fish mae cawn na cholw as lid y potla moro, mae cawn yn sin. The cwsna enman so ta ramjo kaitsnish. Ta olio na sian slayer sŵl, as the bonus olio kais. Olio na cregan.
Roi.
Wel, sian
Olio na sian I sterren, olio y sŵl.
Wel, olio y sŵl. Voor kusten lie on as we ene ook de goede krijgers, de goede georen, de goede meer dan slisk. Als is dat al je zoel, dan krijg. Maar wel het groot fish en goed share, ja, anjebie.
Now, there's much that is wonderful about this. Davy's a fisherman who makes his living from the sea. He's out in the boat with his friend and with our language development officer at the time. We hear Davy telling us about Cion y Kerry, the sour or wasteland that sticks out, the Castellan, the castles, Cregliawer, the long rock where the waves break. Unsurprisingly, fishermen know the names not only for rocks at sea, but also for features on the land that only become important when you're at sea, important in various combinations, quite often in order to get fishing marks. Yet more occupants of the space between, names that appear and disappear depending on where you are, reminding us that storytelling is all about perspective. But this isn't his patch. He's from Port St Mary, the rival port in the southeast of the island, only 5 minutes drive away, but far enough, sometimes a lifetime away. I'm allowed to say that. I'm from Port St Mary. And my grandmother, who was from Craignish, up in the hills, would refer to Port St Mary as the port because in her lifetime it was the most important place, and today Port Erin is much bigger. This film may work in terms of a Manx language video capturing conversation between two of the most wonderful Manx speakers with a real blass, a really good accent, but it is a reminder not to put people in the wrong place. And the last part of the film tells us something else if we listen closely. The names for the rocks are disappearing like the rocks themselves. This is an oral culture, not written down, partly for fear of someone else finding out your precious fishing marks. And there is a feeling like there always is, that all the old fishermen are gone now. So we're reminded not only to record people, but to record them in the right places, in the places that are right for them to tell their stories. It's often said that losing a language is as painful as losing a species, perhaps more so as languages hold so much knowledge, our own particular ways of relating to the world around us. I think that the resilience that Manx and Irish have shown over the centuries is a powerful reminder of how people can challenge what seems like an inevitable decline or loss. The languages did not save themselves. They needed people for that, and they needed stories. The power of people to work together, to care enough to protect, nurture, sustain and encourage new growth. This too is at the heart of the biosphere. I wanted to share now one of the chapters of a longer film that a recent graduate intern at Culture Vannin made during lockdown. It was inspired directly by Biosphere, and both Culture Vannin and the Arts Council here both advertised for graduates who could help tell the story of arts, culture and creativity in relation to Biosphere. Their Intern has just launched a wonderful exhibition of artwork entitled Ellen. Our intern, Sarah, developed the Island Utopias film as a way of looking at issues of climate change, community and sustainability. She worked with visual artists to create time lapses of the production of a piece of art inspired by the words from her interviews. I've chosen to show you the chapter about food, something I think we all obsessed about during lockdown. In our impatient world where so many of us like to sit on YouTube and consume greedily, moving from one video to the next, there is a sense of relaxation in this piece that forces you to sit still. The music is a gently improvised score by Matthew Warren that takes motifs from Manx traditional music, and the beauty of the digital artwork by Bethany White carries the message, I think, to even reluctant ears.
I would like to see a lot more allotments and homegrown food, and perhaps people working together in cooperatives to grow food locally, but also the local agricultural industry really being set up to look after us and create food for us locally, perhaps not so bothered about export, and certainly us not being so reliant on stuff coming in.
So I think there's a few key things that I would have. One of them would be a fully self-sufficient food chain for the Isle of Man, and really investing and supporting our local economy.
I have allotments. My allotment has never looked so fantastic. It is bursting with vegetables, and it also made me think about, whilst this is something I do alongside working and all the busy stuff that you do, the shopping and all that nonsense, I have been saying for a few years, I want to make it pay. I want it to sustain me, you know, and moving forward for the future. I'm kind of like, I am going to make this be as self-sufficient as possible.
The production of food and the use and so eating and growing your own food and eating your own food and everything that goes into that whole journey of planting a seed and then being able to put it on your plate, I think is a really great one.
For me, it'd be better if we didn't actually get meat from a supermarket and everyone went out and hunted their own meat, because then they would understand the connection. I don't eat a huge amount of meat myself, but I think it's nice if you can get it locally.
I think what has happened during lockdown is that people have been using local resources much more, and I think I don't care if the milk that Tesco imports from somewhere else is cheaper. We must buy local milk.
You know, really get up our game in terms of supporting local fishermen, farmers. I think there's such great produce here, and yet it's become just too easy to go and buy stuff that's imported.
And I think we need to stop eating green beans that come from Africa, you know, when we can grow green beans on the Isle of Man.
I think the buying local is a no-brainer in that regard. We can reduce our the miles, food miles that we're travelling, reduce the carbon emissions.
On an island as well, if you're eating meat, eating the meat that's farmed on the island is so important.
You know, that's why we need to rethink. We need to help the agricultural industry to become more environmentally friendly by choosing more carefully what we buy, choosing foods that come from sustainable sources, don't come from the other side of the world, that are farmed in sustainable ways, but also growing more of our own.
We would have low food miles. People would appreciate the value of locally produced produce. Our farmers would, you know, farming would become one of the cornerstones of our economy again.
Sorry, I didn't want to lose the echo of that last chord. It's such a beautiful one. I think all seasons and all weathers are here. The rainbow, used for the National Health Service so powerfully during lockdown over the Isle of Man, is a bright symbol of inclusivity and hope for the future. Its colours reflected in the fish that stream through the ocean towards us. We're taken on a journey through a creative process, something that we don't normally see. So there's a sense of intrigue. Whilst we're pulled along that journey, we hear voices talking about being connected to food production, allotments, cooperatives, thinking about how agriculture will change, eating seasonally, food miles. My mind turns to the 20-minute neighbourhood, to the idea that we should all act and think more locally. Sections and colours flicker in and out as the work progresses, reminding us how easy it is for elements all around us in our landscape to disappear and reappear, how we create and destroy things. And of course, it makes us think about our relationship with food and where it comes from. If we think about how our diets have changed over the course even just of our lives, how we've had to deal with temporary food shortages during lockdown, and how we're in a process of rethinking our connection with the land and the waters that produce our food each and every day, how so many of us resolve to keep a tight grasp of a new normal. And we have a real sense of place somehow in this piece, but it isn't one that feels old or traditional. It is fresh, it is now, and it tells something of the possibilities of the futures. I'm conscious that all this time I've been talking about people and community, and we haven't seen that many people all together in one place in any of our short films. I've been too interested in the individual footprints, perhaps. So we'll put this right with the Port St Mary Hunt the Ren from a few years ago. A little different to the Wren boys you have in Dingle and elsewhere, but a tradition that ebbs and flows like the tide over the decades, and one we are viewing at the equivalent, I would say, of high water on a spring tide here.
Well, we've been hunting the wren here, doing the dance, walking around the village, dancing around the village for quite a number of years now. I think for quite a long time there was no dancing done, and now we've got this tradition of just dancing around the streets. The weather doesn't put us off. It just gets people together and out.
Well, we've come to Sculfort Lamurra to start Hunt the Ren around Port St Mary. We've had the lovely Caroline Helps telling us all what to do and bossing us around and showing us how to do the dance. So we started at the school and then we've moved around the port and we've been dancing in lots of different places around Port St Mary, and everybody's been having a wonderful time and the weather's been great for us.
We always do this every year, works off a bit of the Christmas dinner, and it's always great fun. I think it's always important to carry on doing traditions like this, and this has grown now. I think I counted about 55 people here on that last dance. A few years ago it was maybe 10, 12 of us. We're coming down, restarting this tradition up, and it's growing every year. We're finding it harder and harder to find spaces to dance.
Well, it's a circle dance that involves first the ladies go into towards the middle of the circle and the men come out, and then they swap over and then turn with the partners and then hand on to someone else. Just the idea of this huge group of people coming together to do Manx dancing and celebrate our culture, which doesn't usually happen on any other day, so it's just great to see that happen once a year.
The more you say it, the more bizarre it sounds, but it's basically a traditional folk dance, folk song, and it's a tradition which brings the community together, and it brings good luck, hopefully, for the forthcoming year. But most of all, it brings people together after Christmas, and we have good fun, and we get out in fresh air, and we celebrate being Manx. No, I with Caroline Helps, we reintroduced this in, we think, 1999. We can't be entirely sure, and it's gone from strength to strength.
So many years ago there was a witch on the Isle of Man who had all the men enslaved. All the men enslaved. They would follow her anywhere, up the glens, up the mountains, everywhere, and the crops in the fields were dying and the beasts in the stalls were going unfed, and the women of the island were up in arms about this, that all these men were off chasing tiggy. So they asked Manannan to intervene, and Manannan said, yeah, I think this is, we'll sort this out. So there was a huge battle between Tiggy and Manannan won, as was right, and he banished her. But she was so upset, and he said, well, okay, you can come back to the island for a morning once a year. You can come back to the island on St Stephen's Day in the morn. But on that day, every man on the island and every wife on the island may raise a stick against you. So she comes back once a year on St Stephen's Day in the morn, but she made herself into a tiniest bird that we know, the wren. So she can hide in the bush. So the idea is that we will go out and we will hunt her, and we will put that strumpet to rights. And I do it because it's community, it's fun, and it's keeping tradition alive. We're different.
We've been hunting the wren, haven't we?
Yeah.
We've been dancing, yes. I think it's just the camaraderie and keeping the traditions alive is brilliant.
Well, I still did hunt the wren, I didn't really like it, but I found it very fun.
Yeah. Fun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just brings everybody together.
I do it just simply because I've always enjoyed participating in, the whole culture of the island, because, I value it a lot. I think it's very important.
What do you think, Emily? Did you enjoy dancing in the middle? Did you hold the bush? Did you? You held the bush with the wren in it, didn't you? Yeah. You did, and you enjoy that, don't you?
I get tremendous joy from it. I get people turning up who know nothing about it and standing on the outside and saying, what are you doing, and can we join in? And yes, it's fabulous. There are 80 odd people today dancing around in the sunshine on our island. What could be better?
Now, the line I take from that I really love, I do it because it's community, it's fun. There's a tremendous sense of celebration from the Port St Mary Wrenners. And no wrens were harmed in the filming of this. It's just community coming together, all ages and backgrounds. The edges of the group always fuzzy, never fixed, allowing new people to join, the circle having the ability to get bigger as more people become involved. Even Manannan, the sea god from the opening of the webinar, makes a reappearance, held in the story of the wicked Teggy, fighting a battle to put things to right, to restore balance. It's people that make culture. It's the stories that we remember. It's the stories that we can share. Now, looking at the time, I feel we've come a long way and we haven't said nearly enough. And perhaps we've said too much. We've heard some stories, and even if one of them stays with you, it will have done its job. Our cultures are valuable for their own sakes, and we shouldn't let their often intangible nature see them disappear from view within our biospheres. They offer the shifting layers of identity, sense of place and community that we all need in order to work together to develop a better future. The more confident I am in my understanding of the place where I live, the more chance I have of valuing it, considering myself part of it, and working out what is best for the community around me. Returning to the biosphere lecture I mentioned at the start, Peter Bridgewater talked about how the way of life of Indigenous peoples all around the world has managed biodiversity for centuries. People, their culture and language all hold a lot of knowledge. We have a rich and subtle store to unlock. If we scratch the surface of the Manx English dialect, we find words for particular winds that blow in different places, through this gap, down that hill, one that warms you, another one to be wary of. Black pigs can see the wind, whether it's a flan, a light irregular wind, or a phawan, a dry scorching blast, a blight, or redden, a gust. Sheeb is to blow a driving wind. And as for sharkocks, bottle-nosed threshers, when you see them going to the point of the wind, there's sure to be a storm. At the Euromab conference in Dublin a few years ago, there were some wonderful talks from scientists, biosphere officers, community activists, and from those working in arts and culture. And in the rare moments when they all came together, we had the most inspirational and energizing discussions. The story that stayed with me was the collaboration between artists and scientists in Finland in projects for the Zostra Marina. Breathe by Ialin and Kano used videos of a young child breathing that synchronized with the movement of eelgrasses in various installations and videos to show quite beautifully and simply that they are the lungs of the sea. Earlier, I asked how I can accept that the future is as much blue as it is green. This is how. This is a story I can carry with me, a visual story I can share with you online. It's another webinar entirely to talk about the range of inspiring projects around the world, whether it's a wooden ark placed on a hillside overlooking the Kyles of Bute, a man in a bathtub at Loch Melfort, or the infamous Politicians Discussing Global Warming by Spanish street artist Isaac Cordal. Cultural development workers don't differ from their conservationist colleagues that much. We're all documenting, curating, shaping, hoping to create a balance, not wanting to lose certain aspects, but knowing that we have to embrace some change. We shape and tell stories each and every day. If we realise that we are at the heart of the stories of our biosphere, we have an extra incentive to make them ones that we would want to pass on. To do that, we must also learn how to listen to each other properly, to seek out the right people in the right places, to tell stories which speak most powerfully. It's this sense that we are all guardians, that we all have a responsibility but also an opportunity. I'd like to finish with a very short poem by Karen Clegg, placed on the poetry map devised by our own wonderful Biosphere officers a couple of years ago and hosted on the Culture Vannin website. It talks of a beautiful beach on the west coast and is entitled quite simply, White Strand. On White Strand, the tide is out, and oyster catchers glean the wet green wrack from north to south. Look back, our footsteps follow, brine filling the hollows. The making and remaking of the day, the water's edge, a space full of hope, change and renewal. Ryan.
Amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, that was so good.
Oh my goodness.
Encapsulating.
Do you know, I said at the start that, you know, it offers opportunities to learn. And it's amazing how connected we all are. I mean, there was a post there from Alan, what's this? Saying that the build a house in one day that you mentioned is also a tradition in Turkey, or was also a tradition in Turkey. You know, quite distances apart, but that's repeated. You mentioned the Ren boys, and the Ren boys are a big thing in Ireland because of, you know, St. Stephen. We have St. Stephen's Day, Boxing Day in the UK. You know, the Ren gave away St. Stephen's hiding place. But it's in Ireland, it's also a tradition looking at, you know, from Viking times, where the Vikings were woke up by a host of wrens when they were going to be set upon, and yeah, they were woke up by these wrens banging on a drum. You know, it's probably not all that believable, but it's interesting that, you know, these traditions fit a purpose. You know, giving away. The poor old wren gets the suffering of it, but it's really amazing. I mean, everything that you spoke about, it was fascinating, I have to say.
Well, thank you. They're only fascinating, I think, because they're the stories that come from the community, and that's I wanted to show some of the links that are between here and Ireland, because there are some very strong ones, but it's fascinating to see that that's happening in Turkey as well, about building a house between dawn and dusk.
Funny enough, when I seen that comment, it says the farmer's anecdote is one that was heard in Turkey. And I just thought to myself, I wonder, because one thing I've noticed, wherever you travel in the world, you always seem to find a small connection or link to the island, or wherever you're from, I suppose. But it could be like someone wearing a TT hat, or, you know, someone that's relocated to the USA back in the 50s, and they're proud of their Manx heritage and roots, and they keep that alive. So, and I often say that Manx people are a bit like a rash, and that we get everywhere, and we're so proud that we kind of talk about, it sounds awful, doesn't it, but it's kind of like we boast about this place, and it obviously means that there's something really truly special here. and you probably find that in your biospheres too, that wherever you are around the world, you think, oh, this is like that, or that's from there, or
I think the fact that you are an island, there's that connection and ownership, a stronger connection and ownership. I don't know, maybe that's it, but makes sense. There's a lot of things that I see all over the place that are replicated from back home, and here in Ireland that are replicated from the UK as well. Breesha, I wanted to ask you something about there was one production that you had there where the people were talking about food production, and I was really amazed that the level of knowledge of sustainability and our impacts on the climate, that message has really come through, and people are understanding it much more than maybe a few years back. And this is partly in the way that stories are being told in lots of different media, but what are your thoughts on that? I mean,
Well, I think it's true. I mean, the interviewer with Sarah Mercer, who was our graduate intern, and sustainability is one of the things that she's very knowledgeable about. But she sought out a range of people to have oral history conversations with, and then pasted them all together. And I think what is important for me is that she, by doing that, can take that message to people who wouldn't necessarily just listen to those interviews if they were just sort of somewhere on SoundCloud and they could just listen to it. They go, yeah, so what? It's the editing of them, and it's the putting them together with the music and with the artwork and seeing that come together, that you then find yourself listening and starting to reflect and building your own stories around those. And I think there is a deeper understanding of it. It's whether we take that and we act on it and we actually make that part of our everyday lives, or whether we just carry on talking about it. So I think that's part of the process, is bringing it, well, I've overused the phrase, bringing it into the heart space, but we have to internalize some of these things if we're going to actually make any changes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Breesha. I just wanted to say thank you for such an amazing webinar. Actually, it was lovely to watch, and there's a lot of connections, I think, with sort of the culture in Ireland as well. And like Breesha said about the like a rash showing up everywhere, the people from the Isle of Man, I think Irish people tend to be like that as well, and that we take a lot of our culture with us. So it's lovely to hear about a place that has that same strength of connection to a culture and a heritage. One of the things I noticed when we were listening to the two men on the boat was the listening to it and trying to read the Manx language at the same time. To me, it sounds very similar to Irish Gaelic, but then looking at it, I was like, it looks kind of like Welsh, like it's spelt very differently to how we would spell things. So that's a really interesting aspect as well.
Yeah. I think it's written down, it's a non-traditional Gaelic orthography, and you find those all around the place. In the Scottish Islands as well, you'll find examples of books that are written in a non-Gaelic orthography. It does fox a lot of people if they encounter it written down, but as soon as they hear it, and I think that's why it's important that you heard it, that you didn't just see it, because I think you can listen, and you can listen your way in, and that's something that's very good. There's a sense of semi-communication between Scottish Gaelic and Irish and Manx. So
absolutely, I felt like there was a few words that were so similar. I'm like, I'm almost understanding it, but I'm not sure if they're exactly translated the same or not. So it was fantastic to hear it spoken, actually.
Good.
Jo has popped a question into the Q&A there as well. She said, brilliant webinar. And I think this touches on what you were answering to Dean's question earlier as well. In these days of short order communication, dashing of Twitter, etc., how do we preserve this wonderful longer form of understanding of our culture? That's a big question.
It is a big question, and if we only knew the answer, because we're not going to get rid of Twitter moans. I think we have to produce different things that are going to appeal to different people. If we produce things that are going to always have a sense of integrity, a sense of depth to the culture, then we can get that message across. This message has not always been popular. Cultural identity, sense of place is something that seems to be growing in acceptance at the moment, and that's great. But I know that the people who were working 100 years ago and the same sort of thing were seen as very unusual people, and, you know, they're pushing a message that wasn't, that people weren't prepared to hear. And that's quite, I think, important, and hopefully should be inspiring to some of the conservationists as well, that, you know, you've got to find the right way to tell people a story, and you've got to always approach things and try and listen very carefully. And we've all got to do that. And I think we have to listen to each other more. So I don't know how we do it, Jo, but we'll do it together. I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, and I think as well that things like we've got the Eye Museum now, and like we've kind of got archived places to keep these things, whereas a lot of the kind of, you know, back in the day, like when you say people were looked at as a bit strange, it was kind of not seen as important to preserve, whereas now it has been acknowledged as something that is important. So yeah, and I found with some of my friends when I was younger, there was no real interest in culture and stuff like that, but as we get a bit older, it kind of comes back around, which is nice to see. I mean, I've always been interested in it, and I was lucky to have that link growing up. And what you just mentioned before about listening, that's how I learned Manx Gaelic. I was spoken to by my father in Manx Gaelic as a child alongside English. So it was a strange thing for me to then try and go onto the writing side and the reading side, because you're suddenly using a totally different part of your brain. And I think it's very important to encourage young people as well, and especially in education. And it all once again ties into the holistic kind of management of the biosphere.
And I think the other important thing to take from it is how you make it relevant to you and to each generation. And everybody's shaping that themselves. Everybody brings something else to the culture. And it's not going to be the same way that I first heard it, or I first inherited it, or that I would want to develop it myself creatively. That there should be that freedom, and there is a great freedom, I think, in the culture here, perhaps more so than other places, because so much of it was so nearly lost. And so there's a great creativity and a sense of innovation, and I think that's really important.
With getting messages across to people, I mean, I look at Gardner, who's an educational philosopher, and he has a philosophy about multiple styles of learning. You know, we all learn in different ways, and being able to present, you know, what you're trying to teach in different modes will trigger with some people and not with others, and that's fine. So, you know, when I was an environmental awareness officer previously, it was trying to find ways of getting engagement with young people in lots and lots of different ways, not in the traditional scientific ways, but how could we use music? How could we use art? How could we use drama? And we used all those things to get that message across and bring people on board. And there were lots and lots of different hooks. And I think that's the key, just giving lots of options.
I think you're right. It is. It's always about realizing that we're not all the same, and that's one of the joys of this world, that we're all different, and all the age groups are all different people's backgrounds, different people's experiences, and we are different types of learners. And that's where stories are a really good way, because you'll have your way in, whether you focus on the words or whether you're busy just creating those emotional context and a way of understanding it, or whether you're imagining it visually. So different sorts of learners will get something different from it. So yeah, I think giving people as many options as possible is this way, and sometimes just letting them create things that will speak to them and to their generations, rather than us always imposing stuff on them. So what I think is quite good is working with the community, and then going with community ideas that are there. That lockdown film at the start, I love it. I love the little theme tune they've created for the St. Patrick and the jowl. Just catchy little thing too.
That has to be one of the best origin stories for a piece of land I've ever heard.
Absolutely,
I have to say.
The cushion is just genius. Dropping it's only one of the stories about how the Isle of Man is formed, and that's the other thing, that, you know, there's layers and layers of identity, there's layers and layers of truth, there's layers and layers of stories, and we accept that, and that's part of the joy of it.
I like the fact that you said that, you know, Eleanor or Breesha or Joe, not myself obviously, but could be Minanon, taking that message of climate change out into the world. And obviously, as Minanon, I deny all knowledge that I was he. Um,
no.
no. So it's no, it's fantastic. Now, can I do a little plug? Do you mind? Whilst we've got people here, we have our second Rambling House that's taking place on the 22nd of October. And I don't know whether you have rambling houses over there. I'm sure you probably do, but these are opportunities for people to come to meet in communities and to share stories and song and poetry and whatever else. And yeah, just basically have fun, have a good time. So we have a virtual Rambling House via Zoom, and that's taking place on the 22nd of October. And we're going to be sharing details of that on our website and social media channels over the coming days. So I just wanted to say that so people are aware that 22nd is a date that you may keep in your diary. Okay.
Definitely. I think it's going to be really interesting. I suppose every culture has that connection to storytelling somewhere, and rambling houses are a really big part of Irish culture and storytelling. So it's really exciting to have that happening, Dean. I'm really looking forward to it.
I love just the name Rambling Houses. It sounds really like, it sounds like something I want to get involved with.
Just before we finish up, Breesha, I had another question for you there. A lot of the videos that we watched focused on sort of sense of place or place names and things like that. Do you see a greater connection to place and heritage and culture in it's sort of the groups of people that say come from a farming background or a fishing background or have some sort of tangible connection to land? Or are you seeing a lot of people that maybe come from a more urban background reconnecting to heritage and culture in the same way? Or is there a divide there that you sort of have to, like we were talking earlier, find different methods of communicating or connecting with?
That's a really interesting question. I think they're just different senses of connection. And we're lucky that we do quite a lot of development works, particularly for the music through the schools, so that you access people from all different backgrounds, whether they're rural or urban. And nowhere in the Isle of Man is that urban, which is quite nice. But we find that people find a way to connect through place names, because everybody's got a Manx place name, whether it's their street or whether it's the town that they live or the village or the port or wherever. And so place names are a really immediate way to get people to connect with it, even if they didn't find that it was important to them, or they didn't think it was important to them beforehand. So realizing, just like that farmer when he was first told the field names, he didn't care. He thought, call them 1, 2, 3, and that would work. So that you can find out more about it. And I think giving people that power of ownership, and Manx is taught in all of the island schools, so that gives everybody a chance to access it. And then you can understand a little bit more of your environment around you, no matter where you've come from, because it's sort of, it's equal opportunity through the schools. So I think that's a great way.
That's really lovely. And one of the first ways that I started realizing how important place names were, or like how connected to place you had to be, was there's a certain road close by me, and my parents always called it a name. We called it the Serpentine, because it's bendy like a snake. And it was only when I was older I realized this was just something that my parents called it for us when we were kids, so that we knew where we were going for a walk that day. No one else referred to it like that. And so it was hilarious afterwards, talking to friends, going like, oh, I'll go there. And they're like, where are you talking about? Like, that's not its name, like, which was very funny.
But that's brilliant, because that is a family story that goes with you, and it doesn't matter that only you knew it. You only find that out later. But yeah, we find people react very, very strongly and almost fiercely when some of the place names feel like they're being eroded somewhere, whether they're printed in English and not in Manx, and they go, but everybody knows that as this. So people can defend their patch too, which I think it shows the importance of names. Yeah. I think.
Oh, and also while we're here, just to say that obviously those videos are amazing, and there are so much more available on Culture Vannin's actual YouTube channel and website and all socials. They've got a really, really great kind of social media presence. So do go and find them and follow them and have a little look at all of their videos, because what's great about them is it can just engage you for that short amount of time where you don't feel like you're being talked at for too long. And I think the music and the words and everything about those videos are just very engaging and definitely worth a watch, even if you just learn a little something about Manx culture. Don't think we. Oh, there's some more questions. Is that another one popped up or? Here we go. So we've Muriel Garland. Hello, Muriel. We've had a question from Muriel to say that, she said there's an opportunity for local children to name a recent development near Castletown. Okay, right, interesting. Yeah, so it looks like there's some sort of opportunity there for children to be able to come up with a name. Interestingly, that reminds me of when the new hospital was built, because we'd just planted a tree each at the Millennium Oakwood, and we were told at school, you can all have a go at naming this hospital, and I was convinced I was going to win. So it was the Millennium Oakwood Hospital, obviously, and then they called it Nobles, which was the name of the old hospital. So they kind of, and I remember being really upset, and I think I was dwelling on it for ages, like why didn't I get to name that hospital? So I don't know if you know anything more about this development, Breesha, or no? Okay.
No, I think, but it's an important thing to reflect on, that any new housing developments don't always think about the field names or the very localized place names that went before them, whereas in Ireland I think you have much more established systems in place so that they will be reflected in the new street names that are generated. So perhaps it's worth delving through those field names that are written down and think about those, and think about that deeper sense of place and see which bits of that can carry forward.
Yeah, I'll have to have a look into that when I go offline, because I could take that to, I do a bit of the youth work on a Friday night in Castletown, so I could take that to the children to see if they'd be interested. So it's always a nice thing to feel like you're a part of something as well, isn't it? You've contributed to it.
I'm thinking of names now myself. I'm thinking Minanon has to be a winner. And try Biosphere, and obviously the Manx Minanon is seen with 3 legs, so there's got to be some connection here somewhere.
It's becoming a bit of an obsession now, Dean. Yeah, I have to leave it. Step away.
Okay, I'll step away.
Yes,
I'll just take that with
coffee.
Yeah.
We did speak to Culture Vannin as we were developing these webinars to look at coming up with a name that was a connection, and we were looking at like bridge, and we were looking at all sorts, and Ruth Kegan, bless her, came up with this big list for us, and we ended up just continuing to call them the Try Biosphere webinars. It just kind of worked.
Yeah. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't.
This is it. Yeah, this is it.
Always worth a play.
Yes. It doesn't look like we've got any more questions. Anyway, does anyone else have anything they wanted to add, or?
No, other than to give my thanks for Breesha sharing her time, and really those videos I definitely could watch all day.
Great.
I find them fascinating, amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Breesha. It's been fantastic, actually. I really enjoyed the webinar, and we'll definitely be checking out the videos. As Dean said, I think they're so well presented and give you that little glimpse into the heritage that is so easy to digest in a way. So really looking forward to following up on more of those.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everyone who has tuned in as well, as we know that it's not easy to kind of be on these things when you've got a working day or whatever else you've got going on. So thank you. Always appreciate people coming online.
And obviously they can watch this all again on our YouTube channels.
Or share it with your friends. Yep, it'll be on the YouTube channel. Probably tomorrow, I think, it will be available. We share it on our social media pages, so you can reshare it there, or email it, or text it to whoever you think would like to watch.
Brilliant.
And that means that we've only got 3 left in the year then.
Oh yes, that reminds me. So yeah, 26, 27 or 28, date to be confirmed. I will know Friday which date we're going for, but it's going to be the last of the Dublin Bay Biosphere webinars. And we're going to be taking a look at the work that's going on in each of our local authority areas, work that's been done by our biodiversity officers. So some amazing things. We've got an Irish goat project on Howth, which is a double conservation program. So the Irish goats, a conservation program with them given the opportunity to have a really nice place with great views to maybe increase their numbers, but also manage the gorse in the area and cut down on gorse fires that we have. We've got an Arctic tern breeding program on Dorky Island, which will be fascinating, but also a community conservation program that's been run by volunteers to get local communities involved in doing proper meaningful conservation. And then we've got a whole load of things, otter surveys and ground nesting bird surveys in Dublin, but also really, really clever workbook for schools to get them interested in nature. So all of these things will be shared by our biodiversity officers at the next Try Biosphere webinar.
Excellent.
Plug
Looking
over.
forward to it.
Okay, thank you very much again.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you for my
Thanks,
time.
everyone.
Give me the mug.
Have a lovely day.